It is February 19th, 2016. This is the Watchman News, and I'm Mike Callahan. There's a story coming out of the Oregonian, the Oregon Live website, and it's titled, Sandy Anderson, one of the last 4 refuge holdouts, wasn't aware of federal orders to leave, her lawyer says. The article goes on to say, Sandra Anderson, one of the last 4 to surrender at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge on the 41st day of the armed occupation, will be released, but she won't be allowed to have any contact with her husband, a co-defendant in their pending federal conspiracy case. U.S. Magistrate Judge Janice M. Stewart agreed with the government that Anderson engaged in a very public defiance of law enforcement for an extended period of time. But Stewart allowed for her release, noting Anderson has a steady place to live in Riggins, Idaho, held a steady job, and has no criminal history. Anderson, 48, and her husband Sean Anderson, 47, both of Riggins, Idaho, were among the last 4 who remained at the refuge for another 2 weeks after the leaders of the occupation of the federal sanctuary in Harney County were arrested January 26th. In a negotiated surrender brokered with the help of Nevada Assemblywoman Michelle Fiore, they taken into federal custody on February 11. Anderson has pleaded not guilty to 1 count of indictment charging her with federal conspiracy to impede officers of the United States from doing their work at the wildlife sanctuary through intimidation, threats, and force. The refuge is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She is one of 25 indicted on the federal conspiracy charge. Anderson's lawyer, Tyle Baker, said his client didn't know the Bundys, who led the refuge occupation, hadn't engaged in political protest in the past and initially visited the refuge with her husband on 4 separate occasions, no longer than 2 nights each time, to bring donations and other supplies to the Ammon Bundy and his followers. Baker called Anderson a relatively minor player who got mixed up in these circumstances. Ammon Bundy has said he took over the refuge to protest the return to prison of Harney County ranchers Dwight Hammond Jr. and Steve Hammond and the federal control of public land. On the night that Ammon Bundy and other leaders of the refuge were arrested, January 26, during a felony stop on U.S. Highway 395, the Andersons remained at Malheur Sanctuary and asked to go on an outlying area where they had no cell phone or walkie-talkie connections, Baker told the court. He said Sandy Anderson wasn't aware of federal law enforcement orders to leave the property in the wake of the leaders' arrests. The next morning, Sandy Anderson was surprised to find only herself, her husband, and 2 other men there, Baker said. She was pretty shaken up and scared, he said. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ethan Knight had argued for Anderson's detention, particularly because of the prolonged nature of her time at the refuge. Knight said there was some indication Anderson suffered from mental illness but didn't cite any specifics other than noting her absence of judgment. He pointed out that videos and photos from the refuge captured her with firearms, and 3 additional firearms and ammunition were located in the Andersons' vehicle after they left the wildlife sanctuary. Anderson lost a full-time job working at a Chevron gas station in Riggins, Idaho because of her stay at the refuge, but her lawyer said he expected her to be able to get the job back when she returns. If you want to stay out of custody, you have to follow each condition to the letter, Stewart told Anderson. The judge asked her if that was clear. I understand that, Anderson meekly replied. Anderson needs to maintain a full-time job, live in Riggins, and not possess or carry any firearms. Her travel will be restricted to Idaho and Oregon for court appearances. When the judge ordered Anderson not to have any contact with any of the co-defendants in the federal case, including her husband, Anderson gasped, covered her mouth with her hand, and sobbed, looking down at the defense table. Anderson is not allowed to write, phone, or email her husband or have any physical contact with him, the judge said. Messages only can be relayed through her lawyer, Stewart ordered. Fiore, who talked to the last 4 refuge holdouts on an online broadcast the night before they surrendered and went into Burns on February 11th to help convince them to leave peacefully that morning, attended Anderson's brief hearing Friday. Anderson is one of 4 people who have been released from custody pending trial. The other 3 are Shauna Cox, Dwayne Emmer, and Jeffrey Stanek. Detention hearings for David Fry and Jeff Wayne Banta, who joined the Andersons as the last 4 holdouts, were rescheduled for late February and March. Sean Anderson's attorney asked to cancel his detention hearing set for Friday and has not yet reset it. In related developments, Ammon Bundy and his co-defendants jointly have asked the court for an immediate stay on the federal government's examination of the evidence at the refuge. They argue the FBI's processing of evidence should not be allowed to continue. Defense lawyers and investigators can be present to videotape and watch the activity. In a separate motion, Ammon Bundy's lawyers argued, the problem is this unique case is the government will know what evidence at the scene is specifically favorable to Mr. Bundy as opposed to another co-defendant. Federal prosecutors oppose any delay in the federal investigation of the refuge site. Delay and the presence of third parties during the processing of the crime scene are both unprecedented and would undermine the integrity of the evidence, they wrote in a court filing. That delay would consequently delay the return of MNWR employees and other fish and wildlife for BLM officers to do the important work they are paid to do. Maintain the refuge for the benefit of both the wildlife which inhabit it